Everyone in the mansion thought she was just a maid, and he was just a cleaner. But when the billionaire's frail mother suddenly collapsed after taking her night medicine, one terrified girl in a grey uniform was dragged out into the rain and called a murderer. The fiancé cried in front of the police, waved the pillbox, and swore the maid had poisoned her future mother-in-law. No one questioned her. No one, except the cleaner, quietly watching from the shadows, holding a strange pill bottle. The first thing anyone heard was the crash of a metal tray hitting the tiled floor. Pills scattered across the polished hallway like tiny white beads as two paramedics rushed a limp, grey-haired woman on a stretcher toward the open front doors of the Reynolds mansion. Rain roared outside. Red lights from the ambulance pulsed against marble and paintings, turning the grand entryway into a scene from a nightmare. "Please, save my future mother-in-law," a woman in a silk dress cried, clutching at one paramedic's arm. Her makeup was perfect, though streaked now with dramatic tears. She was fine before that maid touched her medicine. She must have done something, she must have. The paramedic shook her off, focusing on the oxygen mask over Elena Reynolds' face. Elena's thin hand dangled off the stretcher, wedding band glinting weakly in the flashing lights. By the stairs, a young woman in a plain uniform stood frozen. Her name was Grace. Her hands were still damp from washing the old woman's teacup. Now, those same hands shook as two bulky security guards advanced on her. I gave her the pills Nurse Carla prepared," Grace stammered, voice breaking. "I swear I would never hurt her. Please, Mrs. Reynolds." Her words dissolved into sobs. Vanessa, the glamorous fiancée of Elena's only son, whirled on her, clutching a plastic pill organizer in one manicured hand. Several compartments were open, and the tablets inside looked different, some larger, some missing. "Look at this," Vanessa cried to the uniformed police officer standing near the doorway. "Those are not the right pills. My mother-in-law was on a strict regimen. This girl must have switched them or overdosed her. She's been acting strangely for days." The officer glanced at the box, then at Grace. "Mistreating medication for a vulnerable adult is a serious offense," he said. "With her condition, this could be attempted murder." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She shook her head over and over. No. I just did what I was told. Ask Nurse Carla, ask." But Carla, standing behind Vanessa in scrubs, had her arms folded and her eyes averted. "I left the room for just a moment," Carla said quietly. Grace insisted she could handle it. "I shouldn't have trusted her. Mrs. Reynolds was complaining she felt funny after the pills." "That's a lie," Grace cried, her voice raw. "You changed them, you—" "Get her out of here," Vanessa snapped. "Before she runs. I want her arrested." The security guards grabbed Grace's arms. She struggled, tears streaming down her face. A few meters away, a man in a faded janitor's uniform stood half in shadow near the base of the stairs, mop bucket forgotten. To everyone else, he was just Ben, the new cleaner, quiet and efficient. Now his eyes were locked on the scene, burning with something he fought to hide. As the guards dragged Grace toward the door, something rolled near his boot. He looked down. A small amber pill bottle lay on its side, label partly torn. He bent quickly and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Through the plastic, he saw a cluster of identical white tablets, different from the pastel-colored ones Elena was supposed to be on. He looked up just in time to see Grace shoved out into the storm, the gates beginning to close behind her. The police officer turned to follow the stretcher out, calling for an update from the paramedics. Vanessa's voice rang through the air, sharp and righteous. "Officer, I expect you to press charges. I won't let a dangerous maid get away with trying to kill my fiancée's mother." Lightning flashed outside. The man in the janitor's uniform tightened his grip on the pill bottle, knuckles white. Inside, he was no cleaner. He was Daniel Reynolds, the billionaire owner of this estate and the unconscious woman's only son. And he had just watched his mother's most loyal caregiver thrown out like trash, accused of trying to kill the very woman she had spent every day serving. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. What Daniel and Grace discovered after that night would turn this whole mansion upside down. Before we jump back and see how it all began, take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this, where the truth has to fight its way out from under a mountain of lies. 2 weeks earlier, the only light in Grace's apartment came from a cheap ceiling bulb and the flicker of the small TV her younger brother was watching. Paint peeled off the damp walls. The single window overlooked an alley stacked with trash cans. On the wobbly table, next to a chipped mug, lay a single white envelope, her uncle's hospital bill, red stamp screaming, past due. "Luke, turn that down a little," Grace said, trying to keep her voice calm. Her hands were trembling, but this time from nervous excitement. "I have news." Her brother, barely 15, muted the game and swung his legs off the couch. He studied her face with wide, anxious eyes. "Is it bad?" he asked. "Did the clinic call about Uncle Peter?" From the bedroom, a cough answered him, dry, weak, from a man who had seen too much hard work and too little rest. Grace shook her head quickly. "No, it's good," she said. "I got a job, a real one this time." Luke's brows shot up. "Not just a few days of cleaning, not another hotel that underpays." She smiled, and for a second the tired lines on her face softened, showing the girl she had been before responsibility swallowed her adulthood. "No, this is different," she said. "A live-in job, at a big house, the Reynolds estate." Luke's mouth dropped open. "The Billionaires, the ones with the charity foundation on TV?" Grace nodded. "They need a maid. And someone to help care for the old lady, Mrs. Reynolds. She's been ill. They'll pay triple what I make now. And because it's live-in, I won't have to pay for food or transport." Her voice wobbled. "We can catch up on the hospital bills, Luke. You can stay in school. Uncle Peter can get the scans the doctor talked about." The bedroom door creaked open. Uncle Peter shuffled out, one hand on the frame for support, the other holding an inhaler. "Who's paying for what?" he rasped, trying for humor and almost managing it. Grace crossed the room to him in 2 strides, slipping her arm around his bony shoulders. "You are supposed to be resting," she scolded gently. "And you are supposed to be 22 and going to college, not mothering a sick old man and a teenage boy," he countered with a smile. She kissed his cheek. "I got a job in a big house, Uncle," she said. "They want me to start tomorrow. It's live-in, but I'll come visit on my days off. I promise." Peter looked from her determined face to the envelope on the table. "Rich people are complicated," he murmured. "They like their walls high and their rules higher. You be careful, Grace. Don't let anyone treat you like you're less than them because of your uniform." "I'm just grateful for a chance," she said softly. "I'll be careful. I'll keep my head down, work hard, and send money home. That's all." She didn't know then that walking into that mansion would mean walking straight into a war, one she didn't start, but would have to help finish. The next afternoon, a taxi dropped her at the foot of a long, winding driveway. Iron gates opened on quiet motors as security checked her name. There, beyond manicured lawns and trimmed hedges, sat the Reynolds mansion, white stone, tall windows like watchful eyes, ivy climbing its walls. Grace clutched her small suitcase tighter, suddenly aware of the wrinkles in her second-hand blouse. As she walked up the steps, the heavy oak front door swung open. A thin woman in a stiff navy dress and sensible shoes stood there with a clipboard. Her hair was pinned into a tight bun. She wore a name tag. "Mrs. Collins, house manager." "You're late," Mrs. Collins said, though Grace was exactly on time. "I'm sorry, ma'am, the bus." "In this house, we don't blame buses," Mrs. Collins cut in. "We plan better." "Come in." The interior of the mansion was as cold as it was beautiful. Marble underfoot, crystal above, oil paintings on the walls. Grace's cheap suitcase wheels rattled unevenly across the polished floor. "You'll address the family formally," Mrs. Collins went on, not looking at her as they walked. "Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds, Miss Vanessa, you do not speak unless spoken to. You do not enter private suites without permission. You do not linger." She looked over her shoulder, her gaze sweeping Grace's uniform. "You are the new maid. You will assist with general cleaning, laundry, and whatever tasks I assign. But your main duty is helping attend to Mrs. Reynolds in the mornings and evenings. She is frail and particular." Grace nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Mrs. Collins paused at the base of the grand staircase. "One more thing," she said. "This is not a charity. Mr. Reynolds pays well, but he expects obedience. If you make a mistake, you do not argue. you apologize and you fix it. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am, Grace repeated, swallowing the sting. She wasn't here to be proud. She was here to survive. Mrs. Collins seemed satisfied. She gestured down one of the corridors. You'll share the attic room with the other maid. Drop your things and change into proper uniform. Then I'll introduce you to Mrs. Reynolds. Grace hurried upstairs, heart pounding. A few minutes later, in a crisp grey dress and apron, hair tied back neatly, she followed Mrs. Collins down a quieter hallway, carpet muffling their steps. At the end was a door partially open. A soft classical melody floated out, mixed with the faint beep of a medical monitor. Mrs. Collins knocked once, then stepped in. Mrs. Reynolds, she called gently. The new girl is here. The room was large but cozy, curtains drawn back to let in afternoon sun. Family photos filled the walls. A younger Elena with a boy on her lap, then that boy as a teenager, then a handsome man in his 30s at charity galas and ribbon cuttings. On the opposite side of the bed stood a leather armchair, a side table crowded with pill bottles, and a small portable oxygen machine. On the bed, propped up by pillows, was Elena Reynolds. Her silver hair was brushed back, revealing fine lines and sharp, intelligent eyes that still sparkled despite the dark circles beneath them. So this is the new angel they hired to watch me, Elena said, lips twitching. Come closer, dear, I don't bite. Grace stepped forward, hands clasped. Good afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds, she said. My name is Grace. It's an honor to meet you. Honor? Elena's smile widened. Oh, I like that. Everyone else here treats me like I'm a burden on a schedule. She looked at Mrs. Collins. Leave us for a minute, please. I want to talk to her without you hovering over my shoulder with that clipboard. Mrs. Collins hesitated, then nodded stiffly. As you wish, ma'am. I'll be just outside if you need anything. When the door clicked shut, Elena motioned to the chair beside her. Sit, child. You're making me tired just looking at how tense you are. Grace perched on the edge of the chair, unsure if it was allowed, but unable to resist the gentle order. Tell me, Elena said, studying her face, where are you from? And don't say the agency. I'm not hiring a robot. I'm hiring a human being. Grace let out a small, surprised laugh. I'm from the South Side, ma'am, she said. I live with my uncle and my little brother. My parents passed when I was a teenager. I'm sorry, Elena said softly, and now you're out in the world caring for old women like me, she sighed. Life is not fair, is it, Grace? No, ma'am, Grace answered quietly, but it gives us chances. I'm grateful for this one. Elena nodded approvingly. Humility and gratitude, rare things in this house lately, she murmured. Then she reached out a frail hand. Help me with my tea. The nurse always makes it too bitter. As Grace poured and stirred, fingers steady, she didn't notice the shadow moving at the edge of the room, a man in grey overalls who had been dusting the bookshelf, now pausing to listen. Later, in the kitchen, Grace met him properly. She was struggling with a stack of silver trays when a hand reached out, taking half the weight. Here, let me, the man said. He was tall, with dark hair tucked under a faded cap, and eyes that seemed older than his worn uniform suggested. Thank you, Grace said, surprised. They're heavier than they look. They always are, he replied with a faint smile. I'm Ben, new cleaner. Grace, she said, new maid. So I heard, he said. Word travels fast in this house. She frowned. Already, he shrugged. Mrs. Collins is very efficient, he said dryly. There was something about the way he carried himself, back straight, movements precise, gaze taking in every detail of the kitchen, that made Grace think he wasn't like the other staff she had seen hastily scrubbing and hurrying. But she brushed the thought aside. Rich or poor, everyone worked for someone. Neither of them knew exactly how much their lives would intertwine over the next 2 weeks. The first days were exhausting, but in a way that made Grace feel alive. She woke before dawn, helped the cook prepare breakfast, then carried a tray up to Elena's room. She helped the old woman wash her face, smoothed hand cream over paper-thin skin, brushed her hair gently. You have good hands, Elena said once, watching her in the vanity mirror. Not clumsy, not rough, gentle but firm. Did you ever think of becoming a nurse? Grace smiled faintly. I wanted to, ma'am, she said, but school fees, life, things, they got in the way. Elena looked at her reflection. Life gets in the way of everything, she murmured. But gifts like yours shouldn't go to waste. Downstairs, when the house was quiet, Grace would often pass Ben in the corridor. He was always carrying something, a mop, a stack of towels, a trash bag, but his eyes would flick toward her, assessing, as if he were cataloguing every interaction in the house. One morning, while she dusted the formal dining room, she overheard him whistling softly as he cleaned the floor. "You whistle," she observed, smiling. "Only when no one important is around to hear it," he said. "Mrs. Collins thinks joy is contagious. She doesn't want an outbreak." Grace covered her mouth to hide her laugh. "Careful," she whispered. "Someone might hear you." He winked. "Let them," he said. "If I'm going to mop gold-plated floors, I'm allowed one small rebellion." The first time Grace met Vanessa was 3 days into the job. She was arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase in the living room when the front door opened and clicking heels echoed across the marble. Vanessa swept in like she owned the place. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her dress hugging every line of her body, designer handbag dangling from one wrist. Sunglasses hid her eyes until she took them off and handed them without looking to the nearest staff member, who happened to be Grace. "Oh," Vanessa said, glancing at her as if noticing her existence for the first time. "You're new." "Yes, Miss Vanessa," Grace said quickly, flustered. "I'm Grace, the new maid." "H.M." Vanessa's gaze slid over her. "Make sure my roses are fresh every morning. And please, someone tell Mrs. Reynolds that I'll be up after I've had my coffee. She gets fussy if I don't show my face every day." "We don't want her agitated, do we?" Her tone suggested that Alina's feelings were more of an inconvenience than a concern. Later, Grace carried Vanessa's coffee tray up to a sitting room adjoining Alina's suite. Vanessa sat by the window, phone in hand, scrolling through social media. "Just leave it there," she said, not looking up. "Oh, and remind Carla to check my future mother-in-law's blood pressure again. She seemed off this morning." "Yes, miss," Grace said. When she turned to go, she saw Nurse Carla coming in from the hall with a small tray of medication. Carla's eyes were cool, her expression professional. Without thinking, Grace asked, "Is Mrs. Reynolds okay? She seemed a little sleepy at breakfast." Vanessa's head jerked up, her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you questioning the nurse's care now?" Grace flinched. "No, miss. I was just overstepping," Vanessa interrupted. Her smile spread like a thin layer of ice. "You're a maid, Grace. You dust, you clean, you bring tea. Leave the medical decisions to people who went to school for more than a year, yes." Carla's lips tightened. She said nothing, but when she passed Grace, her shoulder brushed hers just a little too firmly. That night, Grace sat on the narrow staff bed, twisting her hands together, replaying the interaction. "I was only worried," she whispered to herself. "That's all." The next morning, she found 2 $100 bills lying on the vanity table in Alina's dressing room as she dusted. Her heart skipped. It would have been so easy to slip them into her apron. Uncle Peter's medicine, Luke's textbooks. She closed her eyes, then deliberately picked up the notes and walked to the intercom. "Mrs. Collins," she said, voice steady, "I think someone dropped some money in Mrs. Reynolds' room. I'm returning it to you." Mrs. Collins appeared in the doorway within minutes, eyes sharp. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked. "On the vanity, ma'am, next to the brush," Grace said. Mrs. Collins studied her for a long moment, then plucked the money from her hand. "I see," she said. "Very well, you may go." As Grace left, she passed Vanessa in the hall. The fiancé's expression was tight, calculating. Later, in the kitchen, Grace overheard Vanessa talking to Mrs. Collins in a low voice. "It was just lying there," Vanessa said. "You know how it is. Some people can't resist temptation." "Miss Vanessa, she returned it," Mrs. Collins said carefully. "For now," Vanessa replied. "Let's just keep an eye on her, shall we?" From behind the pantry door, Grace's heart sank. It didn't matter what she did. In their eyes, she would always be suspected first. Over the next days, Vanessa's subtle cruelty escalated. She would call for Grace to bring tea, then scold her for being too slow, even if she arrived within a minute. She would compliment other staff loudly within Grace's hearing, then ignore her completely. And always, she hovered over Alina's care decisions. Carla, the nurse, administered pills at precise times. Grace noticed how often Alina grew unusually sleepy afterward, head lolling, speech muddled. "Is it supposed to make you this tired?" Grace asked one afternoon, gently propping up Elena's pillows. Elena sighed. "They say it calms me," she muttered. "Vanessa says I get anxious. I say I get bored of being treated like a piece of furniture." Later that same day, Vanessa orchestrated her first open humiliation. She sent Grace down to the laundry room under the pretense of fetching a particular shawl, then instructed Mrs. Collins to call Elena to the hallway for a short walk. The elderly woman, arms lightly held by Carla, shuffled out of her room. "That's it, just a few steps," Carla murmured. Suddenly, a rug that was usually secured lay slightly curled at the edge. Elena's slipper caught it. She stumbled, arms flailing. Carla caught her just in time before she hit the floor. Elena gasped, heart racing. "What happened?" Grace cried, rushing up the stairs with the shawl in hand. Vanessa appeared from the sitting room, eyes wide and incensed. "What happened is that you abandoned your post," she snapped. "Mrs. Reynolds could have broken her hip." Grace stared at the rug, then at Carla, then at Vanessa. "I was sent to the laundry," she said. "Mrs. Collins asked me to. Are you blaming Mrs. Collins now?" Vanessa's voice rose just as two visiting relatives arrived at the landing, pausing to watch the scene. "It is not Mrs. Collins' job to guard my fiancé's mother every second. It is yours. I thought you cared, Grace." "I do care," Grace protested, cheeks burning. "I then start acting like it," Vanessa hissed. "One more incident like this and you're gone. Do you understand?" Elena tried to speak, but Carla shushed her gently, guiding her back to her room as though she were a child. The relatives exchanged whispers. Something about these new maids and standards dropping. Grace swallowed her humiliation, along with the lump in her throat, and returned to her duties in silence. She didn't see the way Ben had watched from below, jaw clenched, having noticed the perfectly convenient placement of that rug. The night of the collapse started out quiet. Rain tapped against the windows. The house was hushed, most of the staff already off duty. Grace had just finished tidying the kitchen when Vanessa appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Carla is taking a call," she said. "Bring up Mrs. Reynolds' evening pills for her. You know the routine by now." Grace wiped her hands on her apron. "Yes, miss." "Of course." In the small medicines cabinet by the pantry, neatly labeled bottles lined the shelves. Each one had Elena's name, the dosage, the time. Grace had watched Carla prepare the doses enough times to know the pattern. She picked up the blue-labeled heart medication, the white-labeled blood thinner, the small bottle of sleeping pills that was rarely used. Beside them sat the weekly pill organizer, compartments marked with days and times. What Grace didn't know was that earlier, while she had been setting the dinner table, Vanessa had slipped quietly into this same room. Shutting the door behind her, she had removed 2 of the prescribed pills from the evening slot and replaced them with identical-looking white tablets from a small unmarked bottle she had taken from her purse. She had done it smoothly, as if swapping jewelry in a box. She had left, locking the cabinet behind her. Now Grace opened the organizer, checked the chart pinned inside the door, and carefully transferred the pills into a small porcelain cup. They looked the same as always. She carried them up the stairs on a tray with water and a biscuit. In the bedroom, Elena smiled weakly when she saw her. "You again," she murmured. "My favorite visitor." Grace chuckled softly. "I brought your evening meds, ma'am," she said, "and a little biscuit." Elena made a face. "Those pills make everything taste like cardboard," she said, but she opened her mouth obediently as Grace handed them one by one, then sipped water. "All done," Grace said. "I'll sit with you a bit until Carla comes back." They talked quietly about nothing and everything, childhood memories, a song Elena's late husband had loved. After 10 minutes, however, Elena's eyelids began to droop dangerously. "Maybe I am getting old," she mumbled. "Can't even stay awake for a chat." Grace frowned. "Do you feel okay?" she asked. "Just heavy," Elena murmured. "Like my arms." Her hand went to her chest, her breathing hitched. Grace's heart dropped. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said sharply. "Ma'am, can you look at me?" Elena's speech slurred. "Call Carla." Grace lunged for the call button, hitting it repeatedly. No response. She ran into the hall. "Nurse Carla," she cried. "Please, Mrs. Reynolds can't breathe properly." No answer. Heart racing, she sprinted down the corridor toward the nurse's station. Carla stood there with Vanessa, both of them engrossed in Vanessa's phone screen. "What are you doing?" Vanessa snapped as Grace burst in. "Do you not knock, Mrs. Reynolds?" Grace panted. "Something's wrong, please hurry." Carla's face tightened. She grabbed her stethoscope and rushed back with Grace, Vanessa following. By the time they reached the bed, Elena was gasping, hand clawing weakly at the sheets. "Her pulse is irregular," Carla said, listening at her chest. "We need an ambulance." Now Vanessa whipped out her phone and dialed, voice perfectly pitched between panic and composure. "Hello, yes, my future mother-in-law," she cried. "She just collapsed. She was fine until a few minutes ago. The maid gave her the wrong pills. I think, please come quickly." Grace stared at her. "That's not what happened," she protested. "I gave her what was in the organizer like always. You saw me." "Did I?" Vanessa shot back. "Or did I come in to find you alone with her, pills already in her hand?" In the chaos, no one noticed Ben, standing in the shadows of the hallway, watching, listening. He saw Vanessa grab the pill organizer from the bedside table and thrust it toward Carla. "Look at this," she exclaimed. "These aren't the usual pills. She must have changed them." Carla's eyes flicked to the box, then to Vanessa. There was a flicker, fear maybe, or guilt, but then her face smoothed. "They do look different," she said. Sirens wailed outside. The scene from the beginning unfolded in a blur. The paramedics, the stretcher, the frantic voices. Grace tried to explain, tried to grab the pillbox back and show them the chart, but Vanessa's voice was louder, stronger, carried more weight. "She's been interfering for days," Vanessa insisted to the officer, asking questions, second-guessing Carla. "I knew something was off. And now this, you have to do something." The officer asked a few formal questions, a performance more than an investigation. Grace's trembling answers sounded weak next to Vanessa's confident accusations. "Until we know more, we'll add this to the report," he said. "If hospital toxicology shows any irregularities, we'll be in touch." "Arrest her now," Vanessa snapped. "She's a flight risk." The officer hesitated. "We have no proof yet that she intended harm," he said, "but we'll need her details. She cannot remain here tonight." That was when Vanessa turned to the security guards. "Get her out. She's fired, effective immediately, and make sure every agency hears about this. I don't want her near any vulnerable person ever again." The guards grabbed Grace. "Please," Grace cried, reaching desperately toward Elena as the paramedics wheeled her away. "Ma'am, I would never." Elena's eyes were closed. The oxygen mask covered her face. Rain hit Grace's cheeks as she was shoved out the front door, but she wasn't sure which drops were rain and which were her tears. Behind her in the echoing hallway, Daniel Reynolds stood motionless. This was the moment his plan, to live undercover as a cleaner and observe how his mother was treated, collapsed under the weight of his own cowardice. He had thought he could watch quietly, collect information. Now, an innocent woman was being destroyed in front of him, and his mother's life hung by a thread. He looked down at the pill bottle in his hand, then at Vanessa's rigid back as she barked orders. Something in him hardened. This would not end with Grace as the villain, not if he had anything to say about it. Grace's world shrank from marble halls to cracked plaster overnight. Back in her apartment, the dim light seemed darker than before. The red past due on the bill glared at her like an accusation. Luke hovered at the doorway, watching his sister pace. "What do you mean they said you poisoned her?" he whispered. "You would never." "I know that," Grace said, hugging herself. "But they don't, and they're rich, Luke. Their word, it matters more." Uncle Peter sat silent on the couch, oxygen machine humming softly. His eyes burned with helpless rage. "They can't just lie," he said, voice shaking. "There must be a way to prove." "Prove what?" Grace cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. She immediately softened. "I'm sorry, it's just, there were no cameras in the bedroom. No one will believe a maid over a future Mrs. Reynolds." Over the next few days, she discovered how quickly a rumor turned into a scarlet letter. The first agency she called put her on hold, then came back sounding strained. "I'm sorry, Grace," the woman said. "We've had feedback from your last employer. They said there was an incident with medication. Until that's cleared up, we can't place you with any family." "But it's a lie," Grace whispered. Please, I need work. My uncle is, the line went cold. At the second agency, the receptionist lowered her voice. They said you almost killed someone, she whispered. Big houses talk to each other. I'd try another line of work. Something where references don't matter as much. Outside on the street, Grace leaned against a brick wall, knees weak. If she couldn't work as a caregiver or maid, what was she supposed to do? She had no degree, no savings, no time. The landlord came by that evening. Rent's 2 weeks late, he said bluntly. I've been patient, but I have my own bills. If you can't pay by Friday, I'll have to give the place to someone who can. Grace handed him the crumpled cash she had left from her last salary. It wasn't enough. Please, she said, just 1 more week, I'm trying to find work. He shrugged. You're a good girl, Grace, he said, not unkindly, but good doesn't pay the mortgage. Later, sitting on the floor with Luke and Uncle Peter, she divided a loaf of bread into thin slices. She insisted she wasn't hungry, pushing more onto their plates, stomach twisting with both hunger and fear. The next day, she took a bus to the hospital where Alina had been taken. She stood outside the ICU unit, fingers twisting her cheap handbag strap, watching the doors swing open and closed as doctors and nurses moved through. Excuse me, she said to a nurse at the desk. I'm looking for Mrs. Alina Reynolds. I used to work for her. I just wanted to know if she's okay. The nurse looked at her screen, then at Grace. You're not on the approved visitor list, she said. Family only. I don't want to bother her, Grace said quickly. Could someone tell me if she's stable, please? Before the nurse could answer, a familiar voice cut in. She doesn't need updates, Vanessa said, stepping out from a nearby corridor. Her hair was perfect, lipstick flawless. She needs to stay far away from my future mother-in-law. Grace flinched. How did you really think I wouldn't have people watching for you? Vanessa asked flatly. You've done enough damage, leave. I didn't hurt her, Grace whispered. I love her. Security, Vanessa called, raising her hand. A hospital guard approached. Vanessa gestured at Grace. This woman isn't family and isn't welcome, she said smoothly. She's been harassing the staff. Please escort her out. The guard's grip on Grace's arm was rougher than it needed to be. As she was led away, she glanced over her shoulder, just in time to see a bed being wheeled down the hallway. For a second, through all the wires and tubes, she saw Alina's face turn toward her. Their eyes met. Alina's fingers twitched weakly, as if trying to reach out. Then the door closed, and the moment was gone. On the other side of the glass, Ben mopped quietly in a corner, watching everything. He saw the way Grace's shoulders shook, as she was shoved out of yet another doorway. He saw Vanessa's bored expression the second she turned away. That night, Daniel stood in the small, sterile family lounge near the ICU, phone pressed to his ear, janitor uniform stained from the day's work. Hayes, he said quietly when his lawyer answered, I need you to do something for me, quietly. Yes, sir, came the polished voice on the other end. How can I assist? I need a full record of my mother's prescriptions for the last 3 months, Daniel said. From her regular doctor and from this hospital. I also want a list of all medications ordered to the mansion's address under her name. There was a pause. Of course, Mr. Hayes said slowly. May I ask, someone is poisoning my mother, Daniel said, voice like steel, and they just framed an innocent woman for it. I won't let them get away with it. Understood, Hayes replied. I'll get you everything I can. But you're still undercover. For now, Daniel said. The fewer people know I'm here, the better. I need to see how far Vanessa is willing to go. He ended the call and looked through the glass at Alina. She looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the bed and machines. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I thought I could protect you by watching from the shadows. I should have been by your side all along. A few days later, in a cramped staff corridor at the hospital, a young doctor stood staring at a computer screen, frowning. Dr. Michael Harris was not yet 30, with tired eyes from too many night shifts and a stubborn streak that refused to go along with things that didn't make sense. He scrolled through Alina Reynolds' lab results again, lips thinning. Sedative levels, high, far higher than what was prescribed on her chart, yet there was no note about any additional medication. Strange, he muttered, very strange. Behind him, a mop squeaked softly. You're talking to yourself, doctor, a voice said lightly. He turned to see the hospital's most diligent cleaner, the one who was always near Mrs. Reynolds' room, standing with a broom in hand. His name tag read Ben O. "Sorry," Michael said, rubbing his eyes. Something's off with one of my patient's lab results." "Mrs. Reynolds?" Ben asked casually, though his heart pounded. Michael blinked. "How did you? You're always in her room," Ben said. "You take extra time with her. You frown at her file a lot." Michael chuckled weakly. "Observant for a cleaner," he said. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Her blood work is showing high levels of a sedative that isn't on our list. I thought maybe one of the previous doctors prescribed something, but there's no record. So she's being given something she's not supposed to have," Ben said quietly. "That's the only conclusion," Michael said. "I mentioned it to my senior, but," he shrugged helplessly. "He told me not to make trouble. Mrs. Reynolds' family is generous, especially the future daughter-in-law. She just donated a new wing, apparently. And rich donors don't like questions," Daniel murmured. Michael studied him more closely. "Why do you care?" he asked. "You're just cleaning up after us." For a long moment, Daniel was silent. Then he exhaled. "I'm not just a cleaner," he said softly. "My name isn't really Ben." Confusion flashed across Michael's face. Daniel glanced left and right, then stepped closer. "I'm Daniel Reynolds," he said, "Elena's son." Michael's eyes widened. "That Daniel Reynolds?" he whispered. "Yes," Daniel said. "And before you ask, yes, I've been disguised as a staff member in my own house. I had my reasons. But right now, all that matters is this. Someone has been drugging my mother behind my back." Michael looked between him and the screen, mind racing. "Why not just fire everyone and bring in your own team?" he asked. "Because I need proof," Daniel said. "If the person behind this is who I think it is, she's clever. She'll spin any story she needs to. I have to show the world exactly what she's done." Michael swallowed. "I could get in a lot of trouble sharing records," he said. "If administration finds out, I'll protect you," Daniel said firmly. "Legally, financially, but more than that, you took an oath. To do no harm. Right now, looking away would be harm." Michael stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll download the latest lab report onto a drive," he said. "Print a copy for you, off the official record. But you need to understand, if this blows up, the hospital will try to push blame downward. On me, on the nurse, on anyone but the donors. Then we'll make sure the truth is too loud to ignore," Daniel said. An hour later, in a quiet corner of the parking garage, Michael handed Daniel an envelope. Inside were photocopies of Elena's lab results, highlighting the dangerously high sedative levels, circled in red. "You didn't get this from me," Michael said. "Of course not," Daniel replied. "Thank you, Dr. Harris. You may have just saved my mother's life." Back at the mansion, Daniel, still Ben to everyone else, pushed his cleaning cart down the private wing where Vanessa's suite lay. Mrs. Collins appeared as he reached the end of the hall. "Ben," she said crisply, "Miss Vanessa's study needs dusting. No one has been in there today. Be careful not to touch any documents on her desk." "Yes, ma'am," he said. Vanessa's rooms were a shrine to herself. Framed magazine covers showing her on red carpets. Glass shelves with designer shoes displayed like art. An entire vanity table dedicated to skincare products. Daniel moved quickly but methodically, dusting surfaces, straightening cushions. All the while, his eyes scanned for anything out of place. It was when he knelt to pick up a fallen earring near the bedside table that he saw it. Behind a stack of glossy fashion magazines, pushed to the very back of the bottom shelf, was a small, unmarked white box. Half open, he reached for it carefully. Inside were 2 pill bottles. One was identical to the unlabeled one he had found on the floor the night of the collapse. Same size, same amber color, same cluster of white tablets. The other bore his mother's name, but the dosage printed on the label didn't match what he'd seen in her official chart. His heart pounded. He glanced at the door, then pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He snapped several photos of the box, of the labels, of the interior of the drawer with the box in place. He unscrewed the cap of the unlabeled bottle and poured 1 pill into his palm. It matched the sedative levels in the lab report almost exactly. He was sure of it. He slid the pill back in and closed the bottle, then hesitated. He needed hard evidence, not just photos. Moving quickly, he slipped one of the bottles, the one linked to the lab report, into a small trash bag within his cleaning cart, covering it with paper wrappers. He left the second bottle in place to avoid raising immediate suspicion. He had just pushed the drawer shut when he heard footsteps in the hallway. "Ben," Vanessa's voice called. He straightened, heart hammering, just as the door opened. Vanessa stood there, eyebrows arched. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Dusting, miss," he said calmly, holding up the cloth. She glanced around, eyes flitting to the bed, the vanity, the nightstand. "Well, don't just stand there," she said. "There are water rings on my side table from my smoothie. Wipe them properly. I don't pay this household to leave stains." He stepped aside as she moved into the room, crossing to her wardrobe without another glance at him. As she browsed through dresses, Daniel's eyes slid to the cart. The pill bottle was out of sight. His fingers tightened around the handle. He had what he needed. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. That same afternoon, Grace found herself back at the hospital, clutching a folder of resumes she could no longer hand out. She hadn't meant to enter. She had taken a bus to the cheaper pharmacy across from the hospital, hoping to negotiate a lower price for Uncle Peter's medicine. On her way out, she saw the revolving doors and something pulled her inside. Just for a minute, she told herself, just to see if Alina was still alive. At the information desk, she saw a familiar name on a printed schedule pinned to the board. Family meeting Reynolds, Alina tomorrow, 10 a.m. conference room B attendees. Family representative, Dr. Richards, legal counsel. Her breath caught. "Excuse me," she said to the woman behind the counter. What is a family meeting like that for?" The woman glanced up. "It's usually for important decisions about care," she said. "Changes in treatment, power of attorney, things like that." Power of attorney, the words lodged in Grace's chest like a stone. "Is it because she's dying?" Grace whispered. "I can't discuss patient details," the woman said firmly. Just then, two nurses walked by, chatting. Their voices floated back to the desk. "I heard Miss Vanessa wants the doctors to sign off on an end-of-life directive," one said. "She says Alina wouldn't want to live hooked up to machines." "Convenient timing," the other murmured, "especially with the son conveniently abroad." Grace's blood turned to ice. End of life, preventing life-saving treatment. Vanessa, who wanted Alina out of the way. Vanessa, who had accused Grace of poisoning her after demanding she be the one to bring the pills. She backed away from the desk, mind racing. If Vanessa got full control over Alina's care and finances, there would be nothing to stop her. Grace thought of Mrs. Reynolds' wrinkled hand squeezing hers outside the ICU, of the way her eyes had brightened whenever Grace entered. "I won't let her die thinking I hurt her," Grace whispered. She tried calling the mansion, but Mrs. Collins answered and hung up as soon as she heard her voice. "You're not allowed to contact this household," Mrs. Collins said coldly. "Do not call again." Grace remembered dimly seeing a document on Alina's bedside table once, a brochure from Reynolds International Holdings with an email and number at the bottom, media@reynoldsglobal.com. It had been a contact for press inquiries. She doubted it would reach Daniel directly, but it was all she had. She ducked into the hospital cafeteria, borrowed a pen, and scribbled a long, desperate email at one of the public computers. "To Mr. Daniel Reynolds," she typed, hands shaking. "You don't know me. I was hired as a maid to care for your mother. I was wrongfully accused of hurting her. Your fiancé is trying to stop her treatment. Please, for her sake, look into the medicines. Please, I beg you." She hit send, knowing full well that an inbox like that was probably filtered by assistants and ignored. She walked out into the grey afternoon, feeling smaller than ever. She didn't know that Daniel, with his own investigations underway, was already moving. He just needed one more piece on the board, her. In a quiet law office uptown, Mr. Hayes laid a stack of documents on his oak desk. On top were pharmacy receipts, bottles of sedatives purchased in Vanessa's name, some shipped to her personal apartment, others discreetly to the Reynolds estate. Behind them lay the hospital and private clinics' official prescription lists for Alina. Not one mention of the sedative in question. Daniel flipped through them, jaw clenched. It's clear as day, Hayes said. These pills were never prescribed. Whoever's been giving them to your mother did so without any doctor's order. And Vanessa's been buying them, Daniel murmured. In bulk, Hayes nodded. There's more, he said. Vanessa has arranged a meeting tomorrow at the hospital. She wants Dr. Richards, the hospital administrator, and a legal representative to sign an updated medical power of attorney. Claiming you've approved it from abroad. Daniel's head snapped up. From abroad, he repeated. I'm very much here. She's told them you extended your trip and authorized her to act on your behalf, Hayes said, grimacing. She's brought a lawyer of her own. They plan to push through an end-of-life directive if your mother doesn't show meaningful improvement. If they get that power, Daniel said slowly, she can refuse interventions. Even if my mother could recover, Hayes nodded, and she'd also gain significant influence over your mother's assets until the estate is formally transferred. Daniel stood up abruptly, chair scraping. That meeting is tomorrow at 10, he asked. Yes, Hayes said. Conference room B, ICU wing. Good, Daniel said. That's where this ends. Hayes hesitated. With the records we have, plus the pill bottle you took from Vanessa's suite and Dr. Harris' lab report, we have a strong case, he said. But in a room full of doctors and administrators, they may still lean toward believing Vanessa. They all know her as the loving fiancée who discovered the poisoning Maid. Her story is already in their heads. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're saying we need someone they've dismissed, someone who saw her without the mask, he said. Exactly, Hayes replied. We need the maid, Grace. Daniel thought of her face that night in the rain, pressed against the bars as she protested her innocence, of how she had returned the planted money instead of pocketing it, of how his mother had always seemed more at peace when she was in the room. He had failed her once. He would not fail her again. I'll find her, he said. Finding Grace wasn't easy. Vanessa had been thorough in blacklisting her. But Daniel had one advantage, the loyalty of people Vanessa considered invisible. He started in the staff kitchen, where the old cook, Maria, stirred a pot of soup. Maria, he said, still in his janitor's uniform. You've been here longer than anyone. Do you remember where the agency found Grace? Maria glanced around, then leaned closer. Agencies are only for show, Ben, she said softly. Real hires come from real people. I recommended Grace. My cousin knows her uncle. They go to the same church. Do you have an address? Daniel asked, heart leaping. Maria hesitated, then nodded. For a good reason, I might, she said. Is this a good reason? The best, Daniel said. Half an hour later, dressed now in his own clothes in the back of his car, he held a rumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. A part of town he had never driven through except to get to the highway. The building was old, paint peeling, windows barred. He climbed the narrow stairs, the smells of frying onions and damp carpet mingling in the air. On the third floor, he found the right door. He knocked. Inside, there was a pause, then the sound of scrambling footsteps. When the door opened, Grace stood there, a half-packed bag on the floor behind her. Her eyes widened. You, she whispered. From the house, Ben, Daniel swallowed. My name isn't Ben, he said. It's Daniel Reynolds. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Grace laughed bitterly. Of course it is, she said. Because my life wasn't complicated enough already. A cough from inside the apartment drew Daniel's gaze past her. He saw an older man on the couch, a young boy hovering nearby. I don't have time for jokes, Grace said, trying to close the door. We're leaving. There's nothing you or your family can take from us anymore. Daniel put his hand gently against the wood. Grace, please, he said. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I failed you, and I want to make it right. Her jaw clenched. Make it right, she echoed. How will you erase what your fiancé told the agencies? Will you tell my landlord to wait? Will you? Yes, Daniel said. All of that, if you'll let me explain. Something in his voice, raw, almost pleading, made her pause. She stepped aside slowly. 5 minutes, she said. That's all. Inside, Daniel took in the cramped room, the bare cupboards, the weary faces. It was a world away from the gleaming halls he had grown up in. He stood, feeling strangely awkward, in the middle of their tiny living room. I came back to the mansion a few months ago after my business trip, he began. I heard my mother had been ill. I also heard whispers, staff leaving suddenly, nurses not lasting, stories that didn't add up. So I decided to come home without telling anyone, not as Daniel, the owner, as Ben, the cleaner. I wanted to see who people became when they thought I was no one. Grace folded her arms. And what did you see? She asked. I saw you caring for my mother like she was your own, he said simply. I saw Vanessa speaking to staff like they were pets who'd peed on the rug. I saw her insist on controlling my mother's medication, sidelining doctors and other nurses. I saw the way my mother relaxed when you entered the room and tensed when Vanessa did. He looked at his hands. And I did nothing, he said. I watched. I told myself I needed more proof. Then that night when my mother collapsed and Vanessa accused you, I stayed silent. Because if I spoke up as Daniel, my cover would be blown and I thought I'd lose my chance to collect evidence against her. Grace's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. So you let me lose everything instead, she said softly. Daniel flinched. Yes, he said, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. Uncle Peter spoke up hoarsely from the couch. Why are you here now? He asked. What's changed? Daniel turned to him. I have proof now that Vanessa has been poisoning my mother with unprescribed sedatives, he said. A young doctor risked his career to give me lab reports. I found hidden pill bottles in Vanessa's room. My lawyer traced the purchases. Tomorrow, Vanessa is going to the hospital to convince the doctors to give her full control over my mother's treatment and assets. He looked back at Grace. If she succeeds, my mother might not live long enough for the truth to matter. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. She's still planning to end treatment even after all this, she whispered. Daniel nodded. I'm going to that meeting, he said. As myself, I'm going to expose her. But it won't be enough to just show they were overdosing my mother. Vanessa has already painted you as the villain who mishandled the pills. He stepped closer. I need you to be there, to tell them what you saw, how she treated my mother, how she interfered. Grace's laugh was humorless. Why would they listen to me? She asked. To them, I'm the almost murderer who got fired. I have no power, no name. Names and power aren't the only things that matter, Daniel said softly. Truth does, and sometimes it needs a voice that has suffered because of it. The doctor will stand with us. My lawyer will be there. The hospital administrator will hear the full story for the first time. If you're not there, Vanessa will say I'm exaggerating, manipulated by staff who want revenge. But if you speak, if my mother can see you standing by her side again, he let the sentence hang. Grace turned away, wiping her eyes. You let them drag me out like a criminal, she said. You watch me beg. You watch them slam the gate on me. I know, Daniel said, his voice cracked, and I am ashamed. But right now, this isn't about my guilt. It's about your innocence and my mother's life. Please, Grace, help me do the right thing, even if I did it too late. Luke stepped forward, looking between them. Grace, he said softly, if this helps Mrs. Reynolds, and if it clears your name, maybe it's worth it. Grace looked at her little brother's earnest face, at her uncle's drawn one, at the half-packed bag that represented running away, not starting over. Finally, she nodded. I'll come, she said. Not for you, for her. Mrs. Reynolds deserves to know someone fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Relief washed over Daniel like a wave. Thank you, he said. I'll have a car pick you up tomorrow morning. We'll go together. As he left, Uncle Peter called out. Mr. Reynolds, he said, if you're the man you say you are, you make sure the world knows what your fiancée did. Rich people's secrets shouldn't be allowed to suffocate poor people's lives. Daniel met his gaze. I intend to shine a very bright light, he said. The next morning, the hospital conference room felt colder than usual. A long table dominated the center. At one end sat Dr. Richards, Elena's senior physician, flanked by another doctor and the hospital administrator, Mr. Green. Beside them was a woman in a suit taking notes. Vanessa sat opposite them, dressed in tasteful black, a string of pearls at her throat, a file folder neatly arranged in front of her. Her lawyer, a man with slick-back hair and a smug expression, sat to her right. I appreciate you all making time, Vanessa said, voice warm with practiced concern. I know how busy you are, but Elena, Mrs. Reynolds, means the world to me and my fiancé. We want to do what's best for her. Dr. Richards nodded, steepling his fingers. We are reviewing her treatment plan, he said, but this meeting is primarily to discuss the updated medical power of attorney you've requested. Vanessa's lawyer slid a document across the table. As you can see, Mr. Reynolds has signed remotely, granting Miss Weston, soon to be Mrs. Reynolds, the authority to make decisions on his behalf regarding his mother's care, he said smoothly. Given his business commitments overseas, this is the most practical solution. Mr. Green adjusted his glasses. We appreciate the documentation, he said. However, we still need to be satisfied that we are aligning with the patient's best interests and, as much as possible, her own wishes. Of course, Vanessa said, lowering her eyes modestly. Elena has been so confused lately. Sedated, agitated, I've been the one by her bedside, calming her, advocating for her. When that maid mishandled her pills, it nearly killed her. I can't go through that again. I won't, she dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. Dr. Richards nodded sympathetically. She has been fragile, he said. We're waiting on one last set of labs, but the door opened mid-sentence. Everyone turned. Daniel Reynolds stood in the doorway. He was not in janitor grey now. He wore a dark suit, crisp shirt, no tie. His presence filled the room in a way no uniform ever could. Beside him stood Grace, nervous but steady, wearing her plain dress and the same humble shoes she'd worn when she first entered the mansion. Behind them came Dr. Michael Harris and Mr. Hayes, both carrying folders. Vanessa's eyes widened, then narrowed. Daniel, she exclaimed, standing, what are you? I thought you were in Zurich. You thought I was exactly where you told everyone I was, Daniel said calmly, stepping into the room. But I've been here. In this hospital, in my own home, watching. Mr. Green rose halfway, flustered. Mr. Reynolds, he said, we weren't expecting. I know, Daniel replied. He set a leather folder on the table. Which is exactly why I came, because important decisions about my mother's life are being made based on lies. Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle. Lies, she repeated. What are you talking about? Sweetheart, you're obviously upset. Sit down, don't, Daniel said quietly. There was something in his voice that made even the administrator fall silent. Do not call me sweetheart, not here, not now. He looked at Dr. Richards. Doctor, he said, before you sign anything, I'd like you to hear the full story of what's been happening to my mother, and I'd like the people you've been told to ignore to be allowed to speak. His gaze flicked to Grace and Michael. Vanessa's lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Reynolds, this is highly irregular, he said. We were under the impression that I was far away and easily managed. Daniel finished for him. Yes, that was the impression someone wanted you to have. He opened his folder and pulled out a sheaf of papers, sliding them toward Dr. Richards and Mr. Green. These are copies of my mother's lab results from the last 2 weeks, he said. Provided by Dr. Harris, who first noticed discrepancies. Note the highlighted sedative levels. Now compare them to her official prescription list. Dr. Richards scanned the pages, frowning deeper with each line. This isn't possible, he muttered. Her sedative dosage is far above what we prescribed, and yet there's no documentation of any changes. That's because no doctor changed it, Michael said, stepping forward. His voice shook slightly, but he pressed on. When I brought this to my superior, I was told not to rock the boat, to remember how generous the Reynolds family, Miss Weston in particular, had been. Vanessa flushed. I donate because I care, she snapped. To turn that against me is convenient, Daniel cut in. For you, less so for the patient being drugged into compliance. He reached into his bag and withdrew a clear evidence bag. Inside was the amber pill bottle he had taken from Vanessa's suite. This, he said, holding it up so the light caught the label, was found in my fiancée's bedroom, hidden. The pills inside match, in composition, the sedative in my mother's bloodstream, and the bottle was never part of any official prescription. He slid it across to Mr. Green, who picked it up with trembling fingers. Michael spoke again. I cross-checked the pill type with our pharmacy, he said. No such medication was dispensed under Mrs. Reynolds' name. However, Mr. Hayes here obtained records showing significant quantities purchased privately by Miss Weston over the last few months. Hayes opened his own folder, laying out signed pharmacy receipts with Vanessa's name and signature. Vanessa's lawyer sputtered. "This proves nothing," he said. "Plenty of people take anti-anxiety medication. My client has been under enormous stress caring for her future mother-in-law and drugging her at the same time," Daniel said coldly. "To keep her quiet, compliant, so that when she pushed for control over her treatment and finances, no one would question her." Vanessa stood abruptly, palms flat on the table. "This is insane," she snapped. "You're twisting everything. Those pills are mine. For my nerves, I have a prescription." "Then show it," Daniel said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Green cleared his throat. "Miss Weston," he said slowly, "even if the medication were yours, it would be a grave breach of ethics to administer your own sedatives to a patient without doctor oversight." "I never," Vanessa began. "Did you ever give Mrs. Reynolds any medication not on her chart?" Daniel asked quietly. "Even once," she hesitated. "It was barely a heartbeat, but in that moment everyone saw it." Before she could answer, another voice spoke. "I saw her," Grace said, stepping forward. "Many times." All eyes turned to her. Vanessa's face twisted. "You," she hissed. "What is she doing here? She has no right." "She has every right," Daniel said. "You dragged her name through the mud." "It's time she told her side." He nodded to Grace. Grace took a deep breath. "The first week I worked in your house," she said, looking at Dr. Richards and Mr. Green, "Mrs. Reynolds was drowsy a lot. I thought it was just age, illness, but I noticed Nurse Carla crushing extra pills into her tea sometimes, even when she'd already taken what was in the organizer." Carla, who had been sitting behind Vanessa silently, lurched as if to stand, then stayed in her chair, face pale. "I asked about it once," Grace went on. "Vanessa got angry. She told me to stick to cleaning. She said Mrs. Reynolds got anxious and needed calming, but the more they calmed her, the less she could speak for herself." She swallowed, voice shaking. "The night she collapsed, Vanessa came and told me to bring the evening pills," she said. "Carla wasn't there at first. I went to the cabinet, like always. The pills in the organizer looked the same as usual to me. I gave them to Mrs. Reynolds. 10 minutes later, she could barely breathe. Tears filled her eyes. They said I must have mixed them up, that I'd poisoned her, but I never touched the labels. I loved her. She treated me like a person, not a piece of furniture. She looked little and breakable against the polished backdrop of legal wood and crisp suits." Vanessa sneered. "Of course you'd say that," she said. "You're trying to save yourself." Grace's hands clenched. "I would accept prison before I accepted hurting her," she said quietly. "I go to the hospital every day just to look through the window to see if she's still breathing. Even when they call security on me." There was a murmur around the table. Daniel spoke again. "I was in the house that night," he said. "As a cleaner, I saw Vanessa near the medicine cabinet earlier in the evening, alone. Later, when my mother was being taken away, I found one of those unmarked pill bottles on the floor." He gestured to the evidence bag. "I didn't speak then," he said, voice low, "because I was a coward. Because I was hiding." He met their eyes. "I am not hiding now." Mr. Green looked at Vanessa. "Miss Weston," he said, tone turning formal, "these are very serious allegations. We will need to conduct a full internal investigation. Effective immediately, we are suspending any pending change to Mrs. Reynolds' directives or power of attorney until this matter is clarified." Panic flashed across Vanessa's face. "You can't do that," she said. "Daniel, tell them. You know how much I care. I've been at your mother's bedside every day while you were off playing poor in your own house." Her voice sharpened. "That girl is manipulating you," she said, pointing at Grace. "She's jealous. She wanted to be the hero Maid who saved the rich lady. When things went wrong, she tried to blame me." She turned to the doctors. "She is the one who gave the pills that night," she insisted. "Ask Nurse Carla." Ask everyone in the room looked at Carla. The nurse's hands were trembling, sweat beaded on her forehead. I, she stammered. Daniel's gaze bore into her. "Carla," he said quietly, "look at me." She did, eyes filled with fear. "I know Vanessa pressured you," he said. "I know she made you do things you were uncomfortable with. You can still choose what kind of person you'll be today, a coward or someone who finally tells the truth." There was a long, painful silence. Then Carla broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her words tumbled out in a rush. She told me it was just to help Mrs. Reynolds rest," Carla said, voice shaking. "At first, it was an extra half pill, then a whole one. Vanessa said the doctors were old-fashioned, afraid of new medications. She brought the pills herself. She said she'd talked to a specialist." She took a shuddering breath. "When Mrs. Reynolds started slurring her words, I got scared," Carla went on. "I tried to cut back, but Vanessa threatened to have me blacklisted. She said she'd tell every hospital I was negligent. I have 2 kids, a mortgage." She covered her face with her hands. "The night she collapsed, Vanessa switched the pills in the organizer. I saw her. She told me to keep quiet. When Grace was blamed, I let it happen. I let everyone believe it was her." Her shoulders shook with sobs. The room fell into stunned silence. Then the administrator pushed back his chair, face hard. "Nurse Carla," he said, "you are hereby suspended pending a full review. Security will escort you to human resources. Do not attempt to alter any records." He turned to Vanessa. "As for you, Miss Weston," he said, voice icy, "I will be informing the board of this immediately. While we do not yet have a final legal determination, the evidence presented is deeply alarming. You are no longer permitted unsupervised access to Mrs. Reynolds. Furthermore, we are required by law to report potential intentional overmedication to the authorities." Vanessa's bravado crumbled. You can't," she stammered. "Oh, they can," Mr. Hayes said, speaking for the first time. "And they will. I'll be filing criminal charges on Mr. Reynolds' behalf. Attempted homicide, fraud, coercion." Police officers, alerted earlier by Hayes to be on standby for a possible criminal confession, stepped into the room at the administrator's nod. "Vanessa Weston," one officer said, "and Carla Martinez, you are requested to come with us for further questioning regarding the treatment of Elena Reynolds." Vanessa recoiled. "This is insane," she screamed. "I loved her. I did everything." "Daniel, tell them they can't do this to me." Daniel's expression was bleak. "You loved my mother's money," he said. "You loved what my last name could do for you, but you didn't love her, because love doesn't look like control. It doesn't look like sedation. It doesn't look like framing an innocent woman to cover your tracks." He slowly reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing the engagement ring that had once symbolized a future he'd foolishly believed in. He set it on the table between them. "Whatever this was," he said, "it ends here." Vanessa stared at the ring, then at him. "You'll regret this," she snarled as the officers took her arms. "You think these people are your friends. They're only here because of your name. The minute you're not useful, they'll turn on you the same way they did on me." She twisted, trying to yank free, but the officers were firm. As they led her and Carla out, Vanessa threw one last glare at Grace. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You and your little sob story. Enjoy your moment. It won't last." The door closed behind her. Silence settled over the room like dust after a storm. Then Dr. Richards turned to Grace. "Miss," he began. "Harper," she supplied quietly. "Grace Harper," he nodded. "Miss Harper," he said, "on behalf of this hospital, I owe you an apology. We allowed ourselves to be influenced by wealth and reputation. We dismissed you, and in doing so, we almost lost a patient because we trusted the wrong people." Grace shook her head, tears finally spilling freely. "I just wanted her to be okay," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer. "And now she can be," he said, "because of you." 2 weeks later, the Reynolds mansion looked different. Not because of any new furniture or renovations, but because of something less visible. The tension that had hung in the air like a constant storm cloud was gone. Elena's room, once dim and oppressive, now bathed in soft morning light. The curtains were open, the windows cracked slightly to let in fresh air. A vase of wildflowers, Grace's choice, not a florist's, brightened the bedside table. Elena lay propped against her pillows, color returned to her cheeks, eyes clearer than they had been in months. Tubes had been removed. Only a small oxygen cannula remained, humming gently. Grace adjusted her pillow, then checked the time. "How's your pain today, Mrs. Reynolds?" she asked. "On a scale of 1 to 10, 3, Elena said cheerfully. But my annoyance at being asked that question again is a solid 7. Grace laughed. Duly noted, she said. Dr. Harris will be pleased and slightly afraid of you as usual. Good, Elena said. Keeps him on his toes. She reached out and patted Grace's hand. You stayed, she said softly. After everything, after they threw you out like a stray dog, you came back. I came back because your son gave me that chance, Grace said. And because you never looked at me like I was less than you. Elena's eyes shone. I knew from the beginning you were different, she murmured. The way you poured tea, the way you looked at me like I was a person, not a patient. I just couldn't fight through the fog they kept putting me under. I'm so sorry for what they did to you in my name. It wasn't your fault, Grace said quickly. It was hers. She didn't say Vanessa's name. It felt like a stain she didn't want to bring into this room anymore. Downstairs, staff moved with a new energy. Maria hummed in the kitchen. The gardeners laughed softly outside. Mrs. Collins, once stiff and suspicious, now nodded at Grace with something like respect when their paths crossed. I misjudged you, she had said in a rare private moment. I believed people I shouldn't have. That won't happen again. Grace had simply nodded. She didn't need an apology as much as she needed the house to be safe for Elena and for the staff who would come after her. In the study, Daniel stood with Mr. Hayes and a police detective signing the last of the statements. The DA is confident, the detective said. Between the lab reports, the pharmacy records, Nurse Martinez's signed confession, and the testimony from you and Miss Harper, the case against Miss Weston is strong. She'll likely face serious time. What about Carla? Daniel asked. She cooperated, Hayes said. It doesn't erase her actions, but the judge may show some leniency. Ultimately, she was under Vanessa's thumb, terrified of losing her livelihood. You heard her. Poor people's fear is a powerful tool for rich manipulators. Daniel nodded grimly. I hope she uses this second chance wisely, he said. When the detective left, Hayes turned to him. And you, he asked, how are you holding up? Daniel exhaled. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for months and just woke up, he said. I thought pretending to be someone else would show me the truth. Turns out the truth was standing in front of me in a maid's uniform, and I still couldn't see it clearly until it almost killed my mother. Hayes smiled faintly. You see it now, he said. That's something. Later that afternoon, Daniel climbed the stairs to his mother's room. He paused at the door, watching unseen for a moment as Grace and Elena chatted about something on television. Grace saw him first. Mr. Reynolds, she said, standing instinctively. Daniel, he corrected gently, at least when we're in here. Elena smiled. My boys, she said, one by blood, one by choice. Grace flushed. I'm hardly your family, Elena said firmly. As far as I'm concerned. She looked at Daniel. Did they finish poking you with legal sticks downstairs? For today, Daniel said, moving to her other side. I signed all the statements. Vanessa's bail hearing is next week. Elena's expression darkened. I will never understand how someone can smile in your face and plan your death at the same time, she said. But I refuse to let her be the last shadow over this house. She pushed aside her blanket. Help me up, she said abruptly. Mom, you should rest, Daniel protested. I've done enough resting, she said. There's something in this room I want back in its place. With Grace on one side and Daniel on the other, she slowly swung her legs over the edge of the bed. They supported her as she shuffled to the far wall. There, leaning against the floor, was a large framed photograph. A younger Elena in a simple dress, laughing up at a tall, dark-haired man who looked so much like Daniel that it made Grace's heart ache. They stood in front of the very mansion they were in now, but the ivy was wilder, the paint fresher. It was clearly the day they had first moved in. Vanessa took it down, Elena said softly. She said it clashed with her aesthetic. She wanted to replace it with one of her magazine covers. Grace's hand tightened on the frame. Would you like me to hang it back? She asked. Elena smiled. Yes, she said. Please. Grace carefully lifted the photograph, its weight solid and grounding in her hands. Daniel fetched a hammer and a nail. Together, they found the old hook, a faint mark where the picture had once hung. Daniel held the nail, Grace steadied the frame, and Elena supervised from her chair like a general. Higher, she said. No, a bit to the left. We have to get your father's head out of the shadow. He hated bad lighting. They laughed, and the sound echoed warmly off the walls. Finally, the photo hung straight, catching the afternoon sun. Light spilled across Elena's younger face and her husband's easy grin. For a moment, time folded. Past and present, grief and healing, all in one ripple of glass. Elena exhaled slowly. There, she said. That's better. Grace stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with Daniel. It's beautiful, she said. It's home, Elena murmured. Again, Daniel looked at Grace. I've been thinking, he said, about what my mother said and what you told me about your dreams. Grace frowned slightly. My dreams, she echoed. To become a nurse, he said. Before life got in the way, she blinked, startled. I barely remember telling you that, she admitted. I remember, he said. I also remember how steady your hands were when you cared for my mother. How you noticed things no one else did. We need more people like you in healthcare, not fewer. He took a breath. I'd like to sponsor your nursing studies, he said. Tuition, books, living expenses. You can continue to work here, part-time, as my mother's personal caregiver while you study, if you want that. Grace stared at him, stunned. I don't, that's too much, she stammered. You've already done so much. Cleared my name, helped with Uncle Peter's bills, found Luke a scholarship. Daniel smiled. That was justice, he said. This is gratitude and an investment in you, in every patient who will someday be lucky enough to have you by their bedside. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Elena chimed in, so I can brag that my nurse is a registered professional. They all laughed. Yes, Grace said, voice thick. Yes, I'll work hard. I won't waste it. I know you won't, Daniel said. They stood together for a moment, looking at the photo, at the room, at each other. Outside, the garden bloomed. Inside, the house, once a place of lies and shadows, felt like it was breathing easier. At dinner that night, Maria served stew to the staff and family at the same long table, a new tradition Elena had insisted on. No more invisible walls between the people who lived under her roof. Mrs. Collins clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. I'd like to propose a toast, she said, somewhat awkwardly. To Mrs. Reynolds for surviving all of us, to Mr. Reynolds for finally seeing what's under his own roof, and to Grace for reminding us that uniforms do not define worth. Glasses lifted, even Daniel's. To Grace, he echoed. Grace's cheeks burned, but she smiled. Later that night, when the dishes were done and the lights dimmed, Grace walked back up to Elena's room. She paused by the rehung photo, fingertips brushing the frame lightly. In the glass, she saw not just a reflection of a rich family, but of herself, small, yes, but standing firmly in the center of her own story. She picked up her folded maid's apron from the chair. There was still work to be done, rooms to clean, bodies to care for, but now it was more than survival. It was a path that had begun with injustice, but would lead to something far better. Because one maid had refused to accept a rich woman's lie as the final word. Because one son had finally chosen courage over convenience. Because truth, buried under expensive rugs and locked cabinets, had insisted on coming to light. In the end, it hung on the wall in a shaft of sunlight, in the steady beeping of a recovering heart monitor, in the shy smile of a girl whose name the world had tried to smear. Grace. She had lived up to it. In a world where power and money can twist the story, this tale reminds us that the truth doesn't care about status, it cares about courage. It was the courage of a poor maid and a few honest professionals that saved a life and restored a home. If you were in Grace's shoes, would you have gone back to face the people who ruined your name? Thank you for watching this story until the end. If it moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no one is too small to stand up for what's right.